You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 6,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. The keys felt heavier than they should have. Father Adrian Winters turned them in the ancient lock, feeling the mechanism click into place with a sound that echoed down the empty Vatican corridor. It was dawn, and he was alone, or at least he thought he was. Adrian had been a Vatican archivist for 6 years. His life consisted of cataloguing medieval manuscripts, photographing religious relics, and maintaining meticulous records of the church's historical treasures. It was quiet work, safe work, the kind of work that let him pray in silence and serve God without fanfare. He'd grown to love the rhythm of it. Morning prayers at 6, breakfast with the other priests at 7, then down to the archives by 8. The smell of old paper and leather bindings had become his incense. The silence of the stacks, his cathedral. He knew every shelf, every drawer, every hidden corner of the historical archives. But that morning, everything changed. The envelope arrived at his desk just as the first light broke through the stained glass windows, painting his workspace in shades of amber and gold. Adrian had been cataloguing a collection of letters from the 16th century, correspondence between a Venetian merchant and a cardinal regarding the transportation of relics, mundane work, comforting work. The envelope was anything but mundane. Heavy parchment, the kind the Vatican only used for the most important communications. Crimson wax seal. Papal insignia pressed deep into the red, the edges sharp enough to cut. Adrian stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. His name was written across the front in perfect calligraphy. Father Adrian Michael Winters. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal and unfolded the parchment inside. Father Adrian Winters, you are hereby reassigned from historical archives to special documentation services. Effective immediately. Report to Sub-Level 7, Chamber of the Cross. Come alone. Destroy this message after reading. Adrian read it 3 times. He'd never heard of special documentation services. In 6 years of working in the Vatican archives, he'd learned about dozens of departments, committees, and secretariats. He'd catalogued documents from nearly all of them, but special documentation services, never. Not once. He'd certainly never been to Sub-Level 7. The main archives only went down 3 levels. He wasn't even sure the Vatican had 7 sub-levels. But orders were orders, especially orders bearing the papal seal. Adrian held the corner of the parchment to the flame of a nearby candle and watched it burn. The paper curled and blackened, turning to ash that he swept into a waste bin. Then he stood, straightened his cassock, and began the descent. The directions were simple enough at first. He followed familiar corridors, past the regular archives where Father Giuseppe was just arriving for his shift. Giuseppe waved, and Adrian waved back, wondering if he'd ever see his colleague again. The thought came unbidden and unsettling. He passed the conservation lab where Sister Maria restored damaged manuscripts, empty this early, past the digital imaging room, dark, past the rare books vault, sealed. Then he reached a door he'd walked past 1,000 times but never really noticed. It was tucked into an alcove just past the main staircase. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Simple wooden construction, old enough that the grain had darkened to nearly black. A cross was carved into it, nothing more. No handle, no knob, just a small brass slot for a key. Adrian reached into his pocket. The key had been in the envelope, though he didn't remember seeing it when he'd first opened the parchment. It was iron, old, the kind that looked like it belonged in a medieval dungeon rather than the modern Vatican. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a heavy click, and the door swung inward on silent hinges. Beyond it, a staircase descended into darkness. Stone steps, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The walls were close, the ceiling low. Adrian had to duck slightly to enter. He pulled out his phone to use as a flashlight, but the screen wouldn't turn on. Dead battery, though he'd charged it fully that morning. He felt along the wall and found an old switch. When he flipped it, gas lamps flickered to life along the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the descent look like a journey into some medieval hell. The air grew colder with each step. Adrian descended slowly, counting. 20 steps, 40, 60. The architecture began to change around him. The first level down still looked relatively modern, 1800s perhaps. Plaster on the walls, even if it was cracked and yellowing. By the second level, the plaster was gone. Just stone blocks fitted together with the precision of Renaissance masonry. Dates were carved into some of the blocks. 1523, 1501, 1487. The third level was older still. Medieval stonework, rougher, the blocks less uniform. The gas lamps were farther apart here, leaving pools of shadow between them. Adrian could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. He kept descending. The fourth level showed Roman brick, the distinctive thin red bricks that had been used to build an empire. Some of them were stamped with imperial seals. Adrian recognized a few. Marcus Aurelius, Hadrian, Trajan. He was walking through layers of history, moving backward through time with each step down. The fifth level was stranger. The bricks gave way to stone blocks that didn't look Roman, older, Etruscan perhaps, or something else entirely. The blocks were massive, fitted together without mortar, so precisely cut that a knife blade couldn't fit between them. Adrian had seen similar construction in photographs of pre-Roman ruins, but never anything this extensive. The sixth level made his skin crawl. The walls here weren't built, they were carved. The staircase had been cut directly into living rock, winding down into the mountain upon which Vatican City sat, but the carving was wrong somehow. The tool marks didn't look like anything Adrian had ever seen. Not chisel marks, not saw marks. Something else, something that had shaped stone as if it were clay. The dampness was worse here. The walls glistened with moisture, and the air smelled of minerals and something else, something organic and old. 7. The iron door at the bottom was marked only with a simple cross, painted in faded red that might have once been vibrant. The paint looked old, but not as old as everything else down here. Someone had refreshed it, maybe decades ago, maybe centuries. Adrian stood before the door for a long moment, his hand on the cold iron handle. He could still go back, climb the stairs, return to his regular archives, pretend he'd never received the envelope, claim he'd gotten lost, misunderstood the directions. But he had never been a coward. And more than that, something pulled him forward. A certainty that this was where he was meant to be. That everything in his life had been leading to this moment. This door. This choice. He pulled it open. The chamber beyond was circular, perhaps 50 feet across. The ceiling was a dome carved from solid rock and supported by nothing. Gas lamps hung from the iron chains, their light warm and steady. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were all different. Some were wood, dark with age and polish. Some were iron, painted black or green. Some were made of materials Adrian couldn't identify. Metals that didn't quite reflect light correctly. Woods that seemed to shift colour as he looked at them. At the centre of the room sat a large oak desk, its surface scarred by centuries of use. Papers covered it. Photographs, reports, case files that spilled across the worn wood and onto the floor. Maps were pinned to the walls between the filing cabinets. maps of places Adrian recognized and places he didn't. And sitting at the desk, perfectly still, was a complete human skeleton dressed in a Franciscan robe. Adrian froze in the doorway, his hand still on the iron handle. The skeleton sat upright in a wooden chair, bony hands resting palm down on the desk's surface. The brown robes hung loose on the frame of bones, the fabric old but well maintained, and painted on the chest, vivid and fresh looking, despite the obvious age of everything else, was a red cross identical to the one on the door. Empty eye sockets stared forward at nothing. The bones were real. Adrian could tell that immediately. He'd seen enough skeletons in ossuaries and catacombs to recognize genuine human remains. These weren't plastic, weren't props. This was someone who had once lived, breathed, walked under the sun. Someone who was now very, very dead. Adrian's first thought was that this was a test, some strange Vatican tradition for new assignments, a memento mori perhaps, a reminder of mortality placed here to humble new archivists, to remind them that all their work was ultimately in service to something greater than themselves. Then the skeleton spoke. "Welcome, Father Winters. We have much work to do." The voice was dry, whispering, like wind through dead leaves. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The jaw didn't move, the bones didn't shift. The skeleton remained perfectly still, hands on the desk, empty sockets staring forward. But Adrian knew with absolute certainty, that the skeleton had spoken. He took a step backward, his hand reaching for the door handle, ready to flee back up those 7 levels, back to the world of the living, back to sanity. "Please don't leave," the voice said, softer now, almost gentle. "I know this is unexpected. Terrifying, even. But you were chosen for this. Summoned, really. And I've been waiting a very long time for you to arrive." Adrian's throat was dry. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, that skeletons didn't talk, that the dead didn't speak. But he'd devoted his life to the church. He'd studied miracles and mysteries. He'd catalogued accounts of saints whose bodies didn't decay, of relics that bled, of statues that wept. He'd read reports of exorcisms, of possessions, of things that science couldn't explain. If he believed in all of that, if he truly believed, then why not this? "What are you?" Adrian managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The skeleton was silent for a moment, as if considering the question. Then, slowly, it raised one bony hand and gestured to the chair across from the desk. "My name is Brother Valentine. I died in the year 1178, during the Third Crusade. Not in battle, I was a scribe, not a soldier. I died of fever in a tent outside Acre, transcribing the final confessions of dying knights. I was 32 years old." The hand lowered back to the desk. "I served the church in life, and I continue to serve it in death. I am your partner, Father Winters. Together we document what cannot be publicly acknowledged. Together we preserve the memories that protect the faithful from truths that would shatter their faith, or worse, inspire those who seek power through forbidden means." Adrian still hadn't moved from the doorway. This isn't possible. And yet, here we are. Valentine gestured again toward the chair. "Please sit. I'll explain everything. But first, you must understand what we do here. You must understand why you were chosen." Adrian's legs felt weak. The rational part of his mind was still screaming at him to run, but a deeper part, the part that had led him to the priesthood, the part that prayed in the silent hours before dawn, that part told him to stay. He walked to the chair and sat down. Up close, Valentine was even more unsettling. The bones were ancient, yellowed with age, but somehow pristine. No cracks, no deterioration. The robes were medieval, the fabric hand-woven, the stitching done by someone who'd taken great care with their work. The red cross on the chest looked wet, as if the paint was still fresh, though Adrian knew it couldn't be. "You've spent 6 years cataloguing the church's historical treasures," Valentine said. His voice seemed to come from the air itself, vibrating in Adrian's chest. "Beautiful work, truly. The letter collection from Cardinal Benedetto to the Venetian merchant Grimaldi, the illuminated manuscripts from the scriptorium at Cluny, the architectural plans for St. Peter's Basilica, all vital, all important." Adrian blinked. "How do you know what I've been working on?" "I know everything that happens in the archives above. I know who works there, what they catalogue, what they discover. I've been watching you, Father Winters, not in a sinister way, don't misunderstand, but I needed to know if you were ready, if you were the one whose name has been written in our records for 800 years. "What do you mean, written in your records?" Valentine reached into a drawer. Watching a skeleton open a drawer was surreal, the bones moving with impossible grace, and removed a journal. The leather cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. He opened it carefully and turned it so Adrian could see. The pages were covered in names, written in different inks, different languages, different hands. Some were in Latin, some in Italian, some in languages Adrian didn't recognize. Each name had a date beside it. Brother Hieronymus, 331 AD. Sister Beatrice, 1178 AD. Brother Valentine, 1178 AD. Father Giovanni, 2025 AD. Wait, that wasn't right. Adrian leaned forward, squinting at the page. The last name wasn't Giovanni. It was his own. Father Adrian Michael Winters, 2025 AD. "How?" Adrian breathed. "This book is centuries old. I wrote your name on this page the night before I died," Valentine said quietly. "September 14th, 1178. I was given a vision as I lay dying of fever. I saw you, Father Winters. I saw your face, heard your name, knew that 847 years later you would come. I knew we would have work to do together. And I knew that the case waiting for us, the case at San Pietro, would be the reason why." Adrian's hands were shaking. He clasped them together in his lap, trying to steady himself. "This is insane." "Is it? You've catalogued accounts of stigmata, of saints who levitated during prayer, of possessed objects and miraculous healings. You've read testimonies from hundreds of witnesses, examined photographs, studied medical records. You believe in all of that, don't you?" "Yes, but then why not this? Why is this any more impossible than the wounds of Christ appearing on a nun's hands? Why is this stranger than a statue that weeps blood?" Adrian had no answer. Valentine closed the journal carefully and set it aside. Then he pulled open another drawer and removed a file. The folder was old, the paper yellowed, but carefully preserved. He slid it across the desk. "Our first case together," Valentine said, "though in truth it's been waiting for you since 1978, the weeping statue of Toulouse." Adrian's hands were still shaking as he opened the file. Inside were photographs, reports, witness testimonies, all organized with meticulous care. The photographs showed a marble Madonna in a small French church. She was beautiful, Renaissance work, possibly Italian. Her hands were clasped in prayer, her face serene, her eyes cast downward in holy contemplation. But from those eyes streamed what appeared to be tears of blood. The photographs captured it in shocking detail. Dark red liquid, almost black in the images, flowing from the marble eyes down the cheeks, dripping onto the praying hands, staining the white stone. Adrian flipped through the reports, witness testimonies from the parish priest, from parishioners, from local authorities, chemical analysis reports. The liquid was human blood, type AB negative, the same blood type found on the Shroud of Turin. The statue had wept for 33 days, then stopped, No explanation, no source for the blood. The marble itself was solid, unbroken. The statue had been x-rayed, examined by experts. Nothing. The church had investigated thoroughly. The Vatican had sent investigators, 3 different teams over the course of the 33 days. All had concluded the same thing. No fraud detected, no explanation possible. The case had been sealed and sent to special documentation services. It could still be fraud, Adrian said, though his voice lacked conviction. Sophisticated fraud, but fraud nonetheless. Someone could have applied the blood, created some mechanism we couldn't detect. Look at the 3rd photograph, the close-up of the tears. Adrian found it, a detailed shot of the marble face taken on day 17 of the weeping. The tears were caught in perfect clarity, the blood fresh and glistening. And there, in the reflection of the blood on the statue's cheek, was a face. Adrian squinted at it, trying to make out the features. The reflection was distorted by the curve of the liquid, but there was definitely someone there. Someone standing in front of the statue when the photograph was taken. "Use the magnifying glass," Valentine said, sliding one across the desk. The magnifying glass was old, the handle carved ivory, the lens crystal. Adrian held it over the photograph, focusing on the reflection. The face became clear. It was his own face. Adrian dropped the magnifying glass. It clattered on the desk, rolling to a stop against a stack of papers. That's not possible. I wasn't there. I wasn't even born in 1978. I was born in 1989. I was 11 years away from existing when that photograph was taken. And yet, there you are, Valentine said quietly. Some cases choose their investigators, Father Winters. Some cases reach through time itself, touching those who will one day need to understand them. The weeping Madonna of Toulouse knew you would sit here, in this room 47 years after her tears dried. She marked you in her reflection so that when this moment came, you would know that none of this is coincidence. Adrian picked up the magnifying glass with trembling hands and looked again. The face in the reflection was unmistakable. His own features, his own eyes, his own expression, shock and wonder and fear all mixed together, exactly as he must look right now. "How?" he whispered. "I don't know," Valentine admitted. "I've been doing this work for 847 years, and I still don't understand all of it. Time is not what we think it is. Faith is not what we think it is. The world is layered with mysteries that science cannot touch and theology struggles to explain. We document these mysteries, we preserve them, we ensure they're never forgotten." Adrian set down the magnifying glass and closed the file. His hands had stopped shaking. In their place was a strange calm, the kind that comes after shock, when the mind simply accepts what it cannot process. "You said you've been doing this for 847 years. "Yes." "Show me more." Over the following hours, or was it days? Time seemed to move strangely in that circular chamber. Valentine showed Adrian case after case. He pulled files from the ancient cabinets, each one a window into the impossible. The possessed bells of Prague. 1823. A set of church bells in the old town that began ringing themselves 3 days before each death in the parish. Not just any death, only deaths by violence or accident. The bells would ring in a specific pattern, a mournful toll that everyone recognized. At first, the parish thought it was coincidence. Then the pattern became clear. 3 days before young Josef Moravec fell from a roof, the bells rang. 3 days before old Anna Novak was trampled by a horse, the bells rang. 3 days before the fire that killed the baker and his family, the bells rang. The authorities investigated, found no mechanism, no person pulling the ropes. The ropes themselves were often tied up, secured, impossible to ring, but the bells rang anyway. The church sent investigators. They documented 87 instances over 3 years where the bells rang, and death followed exactly 3 days later, Never failed. Never wrong. Then the bells cracked, all 5 of them spontaneously on the same night. They've hung silent in the tower ever since, the cracks visible in the bronze, looking like tears frozen in metal. The speaking skull, 1456, kept in catacomb. B beneath St. Peter's Basilica, in a section closed to the public, the skull of a saint, Saint Ambrose of Padua, martyred in 412 AD for refusing to renounce his faith. The skull sat in a reliquary of gold and glass, and for over 1,000 years it was silent and unremarkable. Then a young priest went to pray before it, confessing his sins, as was the custom. He confessed to stealing wine from the sacristy. A minor sin the kind priests confess all the time. The skull whispered it back to him. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a soft whisper that only he could hear. You stole wine from the sacristy. The priest thought he'd imagined it, but then he confessed another sin. Lustful thoughts about a woman in his congregation. The skull whispered it back. You had lustful thoughts about Giovanna Bellini. The skull knew her name. The priest had never mentioned it. Word spread. Others came to test it. Each person who confessed before the skull heard their sins whispered back to them, often with details they hadn't shared, things the skull couldn't possibly know. The church sealed the catacomb. The skull still whispers to those who come to it, though very few are allowed to visit now. Only priests who have lost their way, who doubt the existence of God. They're sent to confess before the speaking skull, and when it whispers their secrets back to them, secrets no one could know, they leave believers again. The Backward Mass, 1993. A small church in rural Colombia where a young priest named Father Esteban recorded his Sunday Mass, hoping to improve his delivery by listening to himself later. When he played back the recording, he heard his voice, his prayers, his sermon, all normal. But he had left the tape running after the service ended, and at the very end, there was silence, then what sounded like his own voice speaking Latin. But he hadn't been in the church. He'd left immediately after the service to visit a sick parishioner. Curious, he played it backward. The Latin, reversed, became clear and coherent. It was a warning. The river will rise, the bridge will fall, 7 will drown. Tell them to take the mountain road. Father Esteban was confused, frightened. He told no one, thinking he'd imagined it. 3 days later, heavy rain swelled the river. The bridge collapsed. 7 people drowned. A family driving home from the market, the same family Father Esteban had seen crossing the bridge 3 days earlier. The same family he could have warned if he believed the message. He started recording every Mass. The backward messages continued. Warnings, always warnings. Earthquakes, mudslides, accidents. He began to listen, to act on them. He saved dozens of lives over the years. Then the messages stopped, just stopped, on Easter Sunday 2001. The last message, played backward, said only, "You have learned to listen. Now listen to God." Father Esteban sent the recordings to the Vatican. They've been analysed by linguists, audio experts, scientists. No explanation. The voice is his, but speaking words he never said. Warnings about events he couldn't have known. Case after case, Valentine showed Adrian the impossible. And with each case, Adrian noticed something that made his skin crawl. His name appeared in the marginalia of multiple historical reports. A handwritten note in the Prague Bells file, dated 1825. Await Father A. Winters. He will understand the significance. A notation in the speaking skull file from 1654. Winters will need this knowledge for the San Pietro case. A sketch in a file from 1203, showing a monk standing before an altar. The monk's face was unmistakable. It was Adrian's face, drawn 500 years before photography existed. Why is my name in all of these? Adrian demanded, spreading the files across the desk. Why am I in documents written centuries before I was born? Valentine sat silent for a long moment. The gas lamps flickered, casting moving shadows across his bones. Because time is not a straight line, Father Winters. Not in service to the church, not in places like this. The work we do exists outside of normal time. We document the past to warn the future. We study the future to understand the past. And sometimes those timelines overlap. Sometimes they tangle together in ways that shouldn't be possible but are. That's not an answer. No, Valentine agreed. It's not. Because I don't have a better answer. I can only tell you what I know. Your name has been written in our records since I first took up this work. Others before me saw your name in visions, in dreams, in prophecies they didn't understand. You were always meant to be here. The question was never if, only when. Adrian stood and walked to one of the filing cabinets. He pulled open a drawer at random. Inside were files dating back to the 1600s. He pulled out another drawer. 1400s. Another. 800s. How many cases are there? He asked. Thousands, tens of thousands. Every supernatural event that the church has investigated and verified over 2 millennia. Every miracle that was real but couldn't be explained. Every possession that wasn't mental illness. Every relic that truly performed wonders. Every saint who genuinely defied the laws of nature. All of it, documented and preserved. Why? Why hide all of this? If these miracles are real, shouldn't the church share them? Shouldn't the faithful know? Valentine's skeletal hand drummed on the desk, the bones clicking against the wood. Some knowledge strengthens faith. Some knowledge destroys it. If the world knew that the speaking skull existed, how long before someone tried to steal it? To use it for blackmail, for power? If people knew the weeping Madonna could mark faces in her tears across time, how long before scientists dissected her, destroyed her trying to understand? If everyone knew about the Prague bells, how long before someone tried to weaponize that foreknowledge of death? Valentine stood, his robes falling around him. We preserve these cases not to hide God's works, but to protect them, to ensure that when the next miracle happens, we have context, to ensure that when the next supernatural event occurs, we know how to respond. Knowledge is not the same as wisdom, Father Winters. The Church has learned that lesson over and over throughout the centuries. Adrian turned from the filing cabinet. You said we have a new case, an active case. Yes. Valentine moved to the desk and pulled out a new file. This one crisp and fresh. Modern photographs, recent reports. This is why you're here. This is why your name has been written in our records for 800 years. This is the case that requires both of us, the living and the dead, working together. He opened the file. San Pietro Monastery, northern Italy, 3 weeks ago. The photographs showed an ancient monastery, clinging to a mountainside, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. The bell tower leaned at a precarious angle. Parts of the structure were clearly ruined, crumbling back into the mountain. 7 monks entered the monastery's crypt to retrieve ceremonial wine for Easter services. It's something they've done every year for centuries. The crypt is old, dating back to the monastery's founding in 847 AD, but it's always been safe. Valentine spread more photographs across the desk, a spiral staircase descending into darkness, a heavy wooden door, stone passages lit by electric lights strung along the ceiling. Only 3 monks emerged. The 3 who returned haven't spoken a word since. They won't eat, they won't sleep. They simply sit, staring at the crypt door, weeping constantly. The monastery's physician examined them. Physically, they're fine, no injuries, no illness, but mentally, they're gone, locked inside themselves. And the 4 who didn't emerge? Adrian asked, though he already suspected the answer. Valentine pressed play on a small digital recorder. The voices that emerged made Adrian's blood run cold. 4 male voices singing in perfect harmony. The melody was beautiful, hauntingly so. Latin words, or something like Latin. A hymn, possibly, though Adrian didn't recognize it. But there was something wrong about it, something that made his skin crawl and his heart race. The voices were too perfect, too harmonious. And beneath the beauty was something else, something ancient and hungry and wrong. "They've been singing for 3 weeks without pause," Valentine said, stopping the recording. "Without food, without water, without rest. The monastery's abbot, Father Domenico, went down to check on them after the first day. He found them kneeling at the altar in the deepest part of the crypt, singing. He called to them. They didn't respond. He touched one of them. The man's skin was cold, his pulse barely detectable, but he continued singing." Valentine pulled out more photographs. Thermal imaging of the crypt, showing 4 cold spots kneeling in formation. Medical readouts, showing heart rates barely above death. Spectral analysis of the recording, showing frequencies that shouldn't be possible for human vocal cords. Father Domenico sealed the crypt and called the Vatican. The Vatican called us. "Why us specifically?" Adrian asked. Valentine pulled out another photograph. This one was old, from the monastery's archives. It showed the crypt in 1178, shortly after the monastery's founding. Monks stood around an altar celebrating Mass in the underground chamber, and there, carved into the stone above the altar, was a symbol, a red cross identical to the one on Valentine's robe. "This is why you needed a partner who cannot die," Valentine said quietly. "Some places consume the living. Some places are hungry in ways that flesh and blood cannot survive. I will go first into the darkness. But you must be there to witness, to document, to remember. Because if we don't record what happens in that crypt, it will happen again. And next time there might not be anyone who knows how to stop it." Adrian stared at the photographs, his mind racing. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. But first you need to understand something, Father Winters. Once you walk through that monastery door, once you descend into that crypt, there's no going back. Not really. You'll see things that will change you forever. You'll learn truths that you can never unlearn. The world will never look the same." "I understand. Do you?" Valentine's empty sockets seemed to bore into Adrian's soul. "Because I didn't. When I was alive, when I first encountered the supernatural, I thought I understood. I thought my faith would protect me, that knowledge would armor me against horror. I was wrong. The things I saw in my last days of life broke something inside me. And when I died, when I woke up as this," he gestured to his skeletal form, "I realized that some prices can't be calculated until after you've paid them." Adrian met those empty sockets without flinching. "Then I'll pay that price, because if I don't, those monks will keep singing, and eventually, whatever is making them sing will find someone else. Someone who doesn't know what to do. Someone who can't stop it." Valentine was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out one bony hand. Adrian took it. The bones were cold but solid, real. More real than anything Adrian had felt in years. "Welcome to Special Documentation Services, Father Winters. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we go to San Pietro, and tomorrow everything changes." Adrian climbed back up the 7 levels in a daze. The gas lamps lit his way, flickering shadows chasing him up through layers of history. Medieval stone gave way to Roman brick, then Renaissance masonry, then modern plaster. By the time he emerged into the regular Vatican archives, the sun was setting. An entire day had passed. He'd been down there for hours and hours, lost in files and photographs and impossible truths. Father Giuseppe was just leaving for the evening. He waved to Adrian cheerfully. "Long day? You look exhausted." "Something like that," Adrian managed. "We'll get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day in paradise, right?" "Right." Adrian walked back to his small apartment in the Vatican residences. He couldn't eat, couldn't pray, couldn't think. He just sat at his window staring out at the lights of Rome, trying to process what he'd learned. Somewhere beneath his feet, 7 levels down, a skeleton sat at a desk preparing for a journey into darkness. And in northern Italy, 4 monks sang songs that should not be sung, calling to something that should not be called. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He packed recording equipment, cameras, notebooks. He packed holy water and a crucifix blessed by the Pope himself. He packed the rosary that had belonged to his grandmother, the one she'd given him when he entered seminary, telling him it would protect him when nothing else could. He prayed for hours, asking God if this was real, if he was losing his mind, if he should run. He got no answer. Only silence, the same silence he'd known his entire life of faith. The silence that meant either God wasn't listening, or God expected him to find his own way. At dawn, Valentine was waiting by a black car in the Vatican's private garage. The skeleton sat in the passenger seat, robes arranged carefully around his bones, the red cross on his chest seeming to glow in the dim light. A driver stood by the car, an elderly priest with kind eyes and white hair. He loaded Adrian's bags without comment, without apparent surprise at the skeletal passenger. "Father Vincent will drive us," Valentine said as Adrian approached. "He's been with Special Documentation Services since 1973. He knows to ask no questions and forget everything he sees." Father Vincent nodded to Adrian. "A pleasure to meet you, Father Winters. I've driven many archivists to many strange places. San Pietro will be, well, it will certainly be memorable." They drove north from Rome as the sun rose, painting the Italian countryside in shades of gold and amber. Adrian sat in the back seat, Valentine beside him. The skeleton didn't move, didn't speak, just stared forward as the kilometers passed. Finally, after hours of silence, Adrian asked the question that had been burning in his mind all night. "How did you die? Really? You said fever, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Valentine was quiet for so long that Adrian thought he wouldn't answer. Then, finally, that dry whisper filled the car. "I was copying the confession of a dying knight outside Acre. His name was Sir Geoffrey of Marseille. He'd done terrible things during the crusade, things that haunted him, things he needed to confess before death. I wrote down every word as he spoke, and in his confession he described something he'd found in the ruins, beneath Jerusalem, a door marked with a red cross, a chamber beyond that door, filled with impossible things. He'd gone through that door, he said, and what he found there had driven him mad." Valentine's bone fingers tightened on the armrest. "I thought he was delirious, fever dreams, the ramblings of a dying man. But as I wrote, I began to see what he described. The door appeared in my mind, vivid and real. The red cross glowed. And I understood, truly understood, that some knowledge cannot be contained by mere words on a page. Some truths infect those who record them." "What happened then?" Adrian asked quietly. "I developed a fever that night. By morning, I was burning. By evening, I was dead. But before I died, I had visions. I saw this chamber, 7 levels, beneath the Vatican. I saw myself sitting at that desk, bones and robes, waiting. I saw names appear in a journal, names of people who would come centuries after my death. I saw your face, Father Winters, as clearly as I see it now." Valentine turned his skull to face Adrian directly. "And I saw San Pietro. I saw the crypt beneath it, the altar, the door. I saw what waits behind that door. that's why I knew I would not rest. That's why, when my brothers prepared my body for burial, I rose 3 days later, not as a living man, I was truly dead, but as this, a guardian, a witness, a servant who transcends death because the work transcends life. "What's behind the door at San Pietro?" Adrian asked, though part of him didn't want to know. The same thing that was beneath Jerusalem, the same thing that's been waiting since before the church existed, before Christianity, before any organized religion. Something old, something patient, something that calls to the faithful and the faithless alike, singing songs that promise understanding, but deliver only hunger. The car fell silent again. They drove through small Italian towns, each one older than the last. Medieval villages with narrow streets, Roman ruins scattered like broken teeth, ancient foundations that predated written history. The landscape grew more mountainous, the roads steeper, winding up into peaks that scraped the sky. Finally, as the sun began to set, they reached San Pietro. The monastery looked like something from a nightmare. It clung to the mountainside as if trying to climb away from the valley below. The walls were dark stone, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Windows gaped like empty eyes. The bell tower leaned at an angle that should have been impossible, defying gravity through sheer stubbornness, or something else entirely. Parts of the structure were clearly ruined. An entire wing had collapsed, the stones scattered down the mountainside. The main gate hung crooked on its hinges, creaking in the wind. "Cheery place," Adrian muttered. "It was beautiful once," Valentine said. "Founded in 847 AD by Benedictine monks seeking isolation for prayer and contemplation. For centuries, it thrived. A centre of learning, of faith, of holy work. Then something changed. The records are unclear about when or why, but by the 1400s most of the monks had left. Now only a handful remain, maintaining the traditions, keeping the vigil." Father Vincent parked the car in a small courtyard. The engine's silence seemed to echo in the mountain air. The monastery's door opened and a man emerged. He was elderly, perhaps 70, with a weathered face and white hair. His brown robes were simple, worn with age but clean. His eyes held a depth of fear that made Adrian's stomach tighten. "Father Domenico," Valentine said, somehow knowing without being told. "Thank you for waiting." Domenico approached slowly, his eyes fixed on Valentine. He crossed himself, lips moving in silent prayer. "Forgive me, but what? Who?" "I am Brother Valentine, sent by the Vatican to investigate the incident in your crypt. This is Father Adrian Winters, my partner. We're here to help." Domenico's eyes filled with tears. "Help? How can anyone help? They won't stop singing. The three who returned won't stop weeping. I've prayed every hour, said every mass, performed every blessing I know. Nothing changes, nothing stops." "Take us to the three who returned," Adrian said gently. "Let me see them." Domenico led them through the monastery's corridors. The interior was cold, drafty, the stones sweating with moisture. Gas lamps provided light. The monastery apparently had no electricity. Their footsteps echoed on worn flagstones. They passed a small chapel where candles burned before icons of saints. They passed a dining hall with a single long table, empty chairs waiting for monks who would never return. They passed cells, small rooms with simple beds, crucifixes on the walls, windows looking out on the mountain darkness. Finally, they reached the infirmary. 3 monks sat on simple beds, staring at nothing. They ranged in age. One was perhaps 25, one in his 40s, one in his late 50s. All 3 had the same vacant expression, and all 3 wept continuously, tears streaming down their faces without sound, without sobs, just an endless flow of grief. "They've been like this since they emerged," Domenico whispered. 3 weeks. They won't eat. We have to force water into them to keep them alive. They won't sleep. If we close their eyes, they open them again immediately, always staring in the same direction. Toward the crypt, Valentine observed. Yes, always toward the crypt, as if they're watching something, or waiting for something. Adrian approached the youngest monk, slowly. He knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to eye level. "Brother, can you hear me? My name is Father Adrian Winters. I'm here from the Vatican. I want to help you." The monk didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the wall, tears flowing. Adrian tried a different approach. He began to pray aloud, the words of the Our Father, familiar and comforting. Nothing. He tried the Hail Mary, the Apostles' Creed. Prayers in Latin, prayers in Italian. Nothing. He was about to give up when the monk suddenly grabbed his wrist. The grip was iron strong, painful. The monk's head turned slowly, mechanically, until his eyes focused on Adrian's face. The vacant expression remained, but behind it something else stirred. Something aware and terrified. "You've been here before," the monk said. His voice was rough, unused, barely above a whisper. "No," Adrian said gently, trying to pull his wrist free. The grip only tightened. "I've never been to Italy before this trip. Not here." The monk's other hand grabbed Adrian's shoulder, pulling him closer. "Down there. You've been down there before. In the deep place. In the place where the singing comes from. In the place before the beginning." Adrian's heart raced. "I don't understand. You will?" The monk's eyes cleared for just a moment, and in that moment, Adrian saw absolute terror. "You'll go down there, and you'll understand. You've already been there. You're already down there right now. Time doesn't work the same in that place. Past and future and present, all happening at once. You've been down there for 800 years, Father Winters, and you'll be down there for 800 more." The monk released him suddenly and returned to his vacant staring, tears flowing once again. Adrian stood on shaking legs. Valentine's bony hand rested on his shoulder, the same shoulder the monk had grabbed. The touch was steadying, solid despite the absence of flesh. "What did he mean?" Adrian whispered. "I don't know," Valentine admitted, "but we'll find out. Come, we need to see the crypt." They left the infirmary, Domenico leading them through more corridors. The monastery seemed to go on forever, a maze of stone and shadow. Finally, they reached a section that looked older than the rest. The stones here were different, darker, more roughly cut, ancient. "This is the original monastery," Domenico explained. "Built in 847 by the founder, Brother Matthias. The crypt beneath was already here when he arrived. He built the monastery around it, believing it was a holy place, a place of power." They stopped before a heavy oak door, bound with iron. It stood at the end of a narrow corridor, and despite the gas lamps, shadows seemed to pool around it unnaturally. "The crypt entrance," Domenico said. "I sealed it after the three emerged, but the seal keeps breaking. Look." He pointed to the doorframe. Someone had painted crosses around the entrance, blessed salt scattered on the threshold, holy water sprinkled on the wood. But the paint was cracked, the salt scattered, the holy water dried to nothing. "Every morning I reseal it," Domenico said. "Every evening I find it like this, broken, as if something from below is pushing against it." As if in response to his words, the singing began. It came from below, filtering up through the stones themselves. 4 male voices in perfect harmony, the same melody Adrian had heard on the recording, but hearing it live, hearing it in person, was completely different. The sound was beautiful. Impossibly beautiful. Adrian felt tears spring to his eyes, felt his heart swell with emotion he couldn't name. The melody wrapped around him like a lover's embrace, promising comfort, understanding, peace. And beneath that beauty was something else, something that made his skin crawl and his stomach turn, something ancient and patient and hungry. "Don't listen too closely," Valentine warned. "The song is a hook. It catches in your mind, and once it's there, it pulls. The four below stopped being themselves weeks ago. Now they're just instruments, playing a melody older than civilization." Domenico handed Adrian a key. "The door isn't locked. It won't stay locked. But we keep the key as a formality, a reminder that this place should be sealed." Adrian took the key, feeling its weight. It was iron, old, the metal pitted with age. He looked at Valentine. "Are you ready?" the skeleton asked. "No," Adrian said honestly, "but I don't think that matters." "It doesn't," Valentine agreed. "It never does." Valentine pulled open the door. The singing grew louder, filling the corridor with sound that seemed to vibrate in Adrian's bones. Beyond the door, a spiral staircase descended into darkness so complete that Adrian's flashlight barely penetrated it. "I'll go first," Valentine said, stepping onto the first stone step. "Stay close behind me. Don't touch the walls. Don't stop moving. And whatever you do, don't try to join the singing." "Why would I join the singing?" "You'll want to. Everyone does when they get close enough. The song promises things, understanding, peace, an end to doubt. It lies, of course, but the lies are beautiful, and beauty is often more persuasive than truth." They descended. The temperature dropped immediately. Adrian's breath came out in thick clouds. The stone walls were wet with condensation. And something else, something that glistened darkly in his flashlight beam. "Don't touch the walls," Valentine repeated. "The stones are weeping, has been for weeks, whatever is below. It's affecting everything around it." Down and down they went. Adrian counted the steps. 50, 100, 150. The singing continued, always sounding just ahead of them, just out of reach. The melody was hypnotic, pulling at something deep inside Adrian's mind. He found himself humming along before he realized what he was doing. "Stop," Valentine said sharply. "Don't give voice to their song. Once you start, it becomes very hard to stop." Adrian bit his lip, forcing himself to silence. The walls began to change around them. The monastery stonework, already ancient, gave way to something older. Roman brick, then stone blocks fitted together without mortar, then something else entirely. "What is this?" Adrian whispered, running his flashlight over the walls. The stone looked carved, but also somehow grown, organic, the surface rippling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Pre-Roman, pre-Etruscan, perhaps pre-human, this crypt was here before the monastery, before Rome, before civilization. Brother Matthias didn't build around a holy place. He built around something much, much older. They continued descending. 200 steps, 300. They had to be far below the monastery now, deep into the mountain itself. Finally, the stairs ended. They emerged into a vast underground cathedral. Adrian's flashlight swept across the space, trying to capture the impossible dimensions. The chamber was enormous, easily as large as St. Peter's Basilica, possibly larger. The ceiling soared above them, lost in shadow despite his light. Pillars rose like ribs, supporting nothing and everything, their surfaces carved with symbols Adrian didn't recognize. And at the center of it all, kneeling at a stone altar, were the 4 missing monks. They knelt in perfect formation, 2 on each side of the altar. Their eyes were closed, their hands clasped in prayer. Their mouths moved continuously, forming the words of the song that filled the chamber with unbearable beauty. Adrian started toward them, but Valentine caught his arm. "Don't interrupt them, not yet. We need to understand what we're dealing with first." Valentine moved closer to the altar, and Adrian followed. As they approached, details became clear. The monk's skin was pale, almost translucent. Their lips were cracked and bleeding from weeks of constant singing. Their hands, clasped in prayer, showed bones through the skin. Not from injury, but from simple starvation, the flesh wasting away while the song continued. "They're dying," Adrian said. "They've been dying for 3 weeks, but the song won't let them finish. It's keeping them alive, barely, because it needs voices. It needs instruments to carry the melody into the world above." "What is it? What's doing this to them?" Valentine pointed past the altar with one skeletal finger. Behind the altar, previously hidden by shadow, stood a door. It was carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed to drink in light. No hinges, no handles, no visible mechanism for opening, just a perfectly smooth surface that reflected nothing. And painted on that surface in the same vivid red as Valentine's cross was an identical symbol. Adrian's heart stopped. "That cross," he whispered. "It's the same one you wear, the same one from the door in the Vatican, the same one from Brother Matthias's vision." "Yes," Valentine said quietly. "This is why I was sent to you. This is why you were sent to me. This door opens every 847 years. The last time it opened, I walked through it. I was alive then, a scribe with the Crusaders, recording Sir Geoffrey's confession. He'd walked through a door marked with this cross in Jerusalem, and his madness, his confession, led me here, led me through. You've been through that door?" "I died going through that door. And I woke up on the other side, no longer flesh, no longer truly alive, but not gone either. Changed. Transformed into what you see now. A guardian for the archive eternal." The red cross on Valentine's robe was glowing now, pulsing in rhythm with the monks singing. The cross on the door pulsed in response, the two symbols synchronized like heartbeats. "The archive eternal?" Adrian asked, though part of him already knew. "The reason the church has always needed archivists, the reason we document, preserve, remember, the reason some knowledge must be kept but never forgotten. It's behind that door, Father Winters. Every case we reviewed together sits in that archive. Every supernatural event, every miracle, every horror that the church has documented throughout history, and every case that will need documentation in the future." Adrian stared at the door. "How is that possible?" "Because time doesn't work the same in the archive. Past and future exist simultaneously. Every moment that ever was or ever will be. All preserved, all documented, all waiting. The church doesn't just record history, it records eternity." The 4 monks continued their song, and as they sang, the door began to open. No one touched it. No mechanism turned. It simply swung inward, revealing not darkness beyond, but light. Soft, golden light that shouldn't exist this deep beneath the earth. Adrian stepped forward, drawn by something he couldn't name. Through the doorway, he could see impossible things. Shelves stretching in every direction, infinite and endless. Books, scrolls, tablets, files, documents in every language from every time. Some written on paper, some on parchment, some on materials that didn't exist yet, some on materials that had been forgotten for millennia. "What you're seeing is just a fraction," Valentine said, moving to stand beside him. "The archive is infinite because time is infinite. Every moment generates new documents, new cases, new mysteries that must be preserved." Adrian walked forward as if in a dream. The threshold was cool beneath his feet. The transition from stone to something else. Not stone, not wood, not metal. Something that existed between states. Neither solid nor liquid, neither here nor there. Beyond the doorway, the archive spread before him like a vision of eternity. He could see files he recognized from Valentine's chamber. The weeping statue of Toulouse. The possessed bells of Prague. The speaking skull. But there were thousands more. Millions more. Files stretching back to the beginning of recorded time and forward into futures that hadn't happened yet. He reached out and pulled a file at random from a nearby shelf. The tab read, "The Bleeding Icons of Constantinople, 537 AD. Inside were reports in ancient Greek, eyewitness testimonies, sketches of religious icons that wept blood during the plague years. The level of detail was extraordinary. Names, dates, locations, chemical analyses that shouldn't have been possible in the 6th century. He pulled another file, though. The Silence of God, 2157 AD. This one contained reports that hadn't been written yet, documenting a future event where every church, every holy site, every sacred place on earth went silent simultaneously for exactly 3 days. No prayers were heard. No miracles occurred. God simply stopped responding. The reports detailed the chaos, the loss of faith, the desperate attempts to understand. Then, on the 4th day, a single voice spoke from every church at once. I was testing if you would still believe when I didn't answer. You passed. This is impossible, Adrian whispered, though the word felt meaningless now. And yet, here it is, Valentine said, walking deeper into the archive. I've spent 847 years in this place documenting cases from the past and future, learning the patterns, understanding how the supernatural works, how miracles happen, how the divine touches the mundane. And through it all, one truth has become clear. The Church exists outside of time, recording past and future, preserving what must not be lost. Adrian turned to face his partner. The skeleton stood among the infinite shelves, robes hanging loose, the red cross on his chest glowing softly. You died when you came here, Adrian said. It wasn't a question. I died walking through that door. Yes. The transition from the temporal world to this eternal place. Flesh cannot survive it. The body burns away, consumed by the weight of infinite time. But the soul, the purpose, the calling, those remain. I woke up as bones and robe and mission, a guardian who could exist in both worlds, tending the archive, guiding new archivists when their time came. Is that what I am? A new archivist? You're my replacement, Father Winters. Every 847 years, the door opens. Every 847 years, a new guardian must walk through. I've served my time. I've documented what needed documenting. I've waited for you to arrive, and now that you're here, my service is almost complete. Adrian looked back at the doorway, at the crypt beyond where 4 monks still sang their eternal song. What happens to them? The monks? When you choose, when you walk through that door fully or turn back, the song will end. The spell will break. Those 4 will either die or wake, depending on whether their bodies can survive the transition back to normal time. The 3 above will forget everything, their minds healed by mercy they'll never understand. And if I walk through, if I stay? Valentine's empty sockets seemed to bore into Adrian's soul. Then you'll become like me. Your flesh will burn away, your bones will remain, and you'll serve for the next 847 years, documenting cases from past and future, preserving the memories that protect humanity from its darkest truths and greatest mysteries. You'll ensure that what happened is never forgotten, so that when it happens again, someone will know what to do. And if I turn back, the Church will help you forget. You'll return to your regular archives. You'll live a normal life, serve God in normal ways, and die a normal death. Someone else will be called eventually. Perhaps in another 847 years. Perhaps sooner. The archive is patient. It has existed since before the Church, and it will exist long after. But the work will continue with or without you. Adrian stood at the threshold between worlds, literally and figuratively. Behind him lay the crypt, the monastery, the world above where the sun still rose and set, where time moved in a straight line from past to future. Before him stretched the archive eternal, where every moment existed simultaneously, where past and future were merely different shelves in an infinite library. He thought of his quiet life in the Vatican archives, the simple pleasure of cataloguing manuscripts, of preserving history, of serving in ways that were safe and predictable. He thought of the monks, the 4 singing their eternal song, the 3 weeping upstairs, locked in trauma they couldn't express. He thought of the marginalia in those ancient files, his name written centuries before he was born, his face sketched in documents from the 13th century, the reflection in the weeping Madonna's tears, showing him in 1978, 11 years before he existed. "The monk said I'd already been down here," Adrian said quietly. "He said I'd been here for 800 years and I'd be here for 800 more. What did he mean?" Valentine moved closer, his bones clicking softly. In the archive, time doesn't flow. It simply is. If you walk through that door, you won't just serve for the next 847 years. In a sense, you'll have always been serving. Your presence will ripple backward and forward through time simultaneously. That's why your name appears in documents written before you were born. That's why the Weeping Madonna showed your reflection, because once you enter the archive, you exist in all moments at once. "That's..." Adrian struggled for words. "That's terrifying." "Yes," Valentine agreed. "It is. I won't lie to you, Father Winters. This choice comes with a price that cannot be fully understood until it's paid. You'll lose your flesh, your mortal life, your connection to the temporal world. You'll exist in a space between moments, serving a purpose that no one will remember, protecting people who will never know your name." Valentine's hand, bone and nothing else, rested on Adrian's shoulder. "But you will also gain something precious. Understanding. True understanding of how the divine works, how miracles happen, how God touches the world. You'll see patterns that span millennia. You'll prevent horrors before they occur. You'll preserve knowledge that saves countless lives. You'll serve the Church in the most profound way possible, by ensuring that its memory never fails, that its wisdom never dies, that its protection never falters." Adrian looked at the infinite shelves stretching in every direction. He could spend 1,000 lifetimes here and never read every file, never understand every case, never fully comprehend the scope of it all. But someone had to try. Someone had to guard this knowledge, preserve it, ensure it was used to protect rather than harm. He thought of his grandmother, handing him the rosary when he entered seminary. "True service means doing what's needed, not what's wanted," she'd said. "God calls us to hard places, Adrian. The question is whether we're brave enough to answer." He pulled out that rosary now, letting the beads slide through his fingers. The weight was comforting, familiar, real. "If I do this," he said slowly, "if I walk through that door and become the next guardian, what happens to you?" Valentine was quiet for a long moment. "I'm released. My service ends. I'll finally be able to rest, to move on to whatever comes after. I've been waiting 847 years for that rest, Father Winters. I'm so very tired." There was something in Valentine's voice, a weariness that transcended mere exhaustion. 8 centuries of service, of existing between life and death, of guarding infinite knowledge while the world above changed and grew and forgot. 847 years of loneliness, of purpose without companionship, of serving without recognition. "You've earned your rest," Adrian said. "Then give it to me. Make the choice. Walk through that door or turn back. But decide, Father Winters, because the longer the door stands open, the more the song spreads. Already you can feel it pulling at you. The beauty, the promise, the hunger beneath. Soon it will be too strong to resist. Soon you'll have no choice at all." Adrian realized Valentine was right. The singing had grown louder, more insistent. He could feel it tugging at his mind, promising understanding, peace, an end to doubt and fear. Part of him wanted to join the monks, to kneel at the altar and add his voice to their eternal chorus. That was the trap. The song didn't just call to the faithful, it created them, replacing free will with divine compulsion. He had to choose now, while he still could. Adrian looked at Valentine one last time. The skeleton stood patiently waiting, as he'd been waiting for 800 years. Bones and robe and purpose, nothing more. Nothing less. "Thank you," Adrian said, "for waiting, for serving, for showing me what true dedication means." "It was my honor, Father Winters. Now, choose." Adrian took a deep breath, clutched his grandmother's rosary, and stepped fully through the door into the archive eternal. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. Heat, intense and all-consuming, burning through every cell of his body. Not painful exactly, more like a transformation, a purification. He could feel his flesh beginning to dissolve, not decaying, but simply evaporating, returning to the essential elements from which it had been formed. He fell to his knees, the rosary still clutched in dissolving hands. Through eyes that were beginning to fade, he saw the infinite shelves stretching before him. Files upon files, each one a mystery, a miracle, a moment of divine contact with the mortal world. And he understood, with a clarity that transcended mere knowledge, that this was his purpose. This had always been his purpose. His name in those ancient documents hadn't been prophecy, it had been memory, the archive itself remembering his presence across time, marking his existence before he'd even begun. The burning intensified. He could feel his muscles melting away, his organs dissolving, his very substance being refined down to its core. But his mind remained clear, expanding rather than diminishing, taking in the vastness of the archive, understanding patterns that spanned millennia. He saw the weeping Madonna, and understood why she'd wept. Grief for humanity's suffering, tears shed across time for every loss, every tragedy, every moment of pain. The blood had been real because the grief was real, divine sorrow made manifest. He saw the Prague bells and understood their warning. They hadn't predicted death, they'd mourned it, ringing 3 days early because, in the divine perspective, time flowed differently, and what would happen had, in a sense, already happened. He saw the speaking skull and understood its whispers. It didn't read minds, it read souls, seeing sin not as accusation but as truth, reflecting back what was already there. Case after case, understanding flooded through him. Not just knowledge, but true comprehension of how the supernatural worked, how the divine touched the mundane, how miracles happened and why. And through it all, one truth remained constant. The Church preserved these memories because memory was protection. To forget was to repeat. To remember was to prevent. The burning reached its peak, and Adrian screamed, not in pain, but in transformation. He felt his skull emerge from dissolving flesh, felt his bones become clean and white and eternal. Felt the weight of mortality lift, replaced by something both lighter and infinitely heavier. Purpose, eternal purpose. When the transformation was complete, Adrian opened eyes he no longer had and saw the archive with perfect clarity. He stood, bones and robes, the brown fabric having somehow survived when flesh could not, and on his chest, painted in vivid red, was the cross. The same cross that marked Valentine, that marked the door, that marked guardians throughout the ages. He looked down at his hands. Bone. Nothing but bone. He flexed fingers that had no tendons, no muscles, yet moved perfectly because they were animated by something beyond mere biology. "Welcome, Brother Adrian," Valentine said. His voice was different now, lighter, relieved, filled with joy. "Welcome to eternal service." Adrian turned to see Valentine, and for the first time he truly saw him. Not just bones and robes, but the soul beneath. A good man who'd served faithfully, who'd waited patiently, who'd earned his rest. "Thank you," Adrian said, and his voice was the same dry whisper, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Thank you for everything." "The thanks are mine," Valentine replied. "My service is complete. The archive has a new guardian. And I can finally sleep." As Adrian watched, Valentine's bones began to glow, not with the red light of the cross, but with soft golden light, warm and welcoming. The skeleton smiled. Somehow, impossibly, the fleshless skull conveyed joy. "Remember," Valentine said, his voice growing distant, "you serve not to control, but to preserve. Not to judge, but to understand. Not to prevent all suffering, but to ensure that no suffering is forgotten, no lesson lost, no miracle wasted. The world above will never know your name, but it will be protected by your work." The light grew brighter, consuming Valentine from within. His bones dissolved into pure illumination, and Adrian felt rather than heard a final message. "Rest well, Brother Adrian, and know that 847 years from now someone will come to relieve you. Until then, the archive is yours." Valentine was gone, and Adrian was alone in the infinite library, surrounded by cases spanning all of time, guardian of memories that protected humanity from itself. He stood there for a long moment, or was it an eternity? Time felt different here, slippery, non-linear. Then he heard it. The singing had stopped. Adrian walked back to the doorway and looked through. In the crypt beyond, the 4 monks had collapsed at the altar, no longer singing, simply sleeping. Their chests rose and fell with normal breath. They would wake eventually, confused and weak, but alive. They would remember nothing. The door began to close. "Wait," Adrian said, but his voice held no real protest. He understood now. The door would seal itself for 847 years. He would remain in the archive, documenting cases from past and future, learning the patterns, understanding how the supernatural worked. And when the time came, when the next guardian was called, the door would open again. The crypt vanished from view as the door sealed shut. Adrian stood in the archive eternal, alone but not lonely, dead but not gone, transformed into something beyond life and death. He walked to the nearest shelf and pulled a file at random. It was from tomorrow, a case that hadn't happened yet but would need documentation. A possessed painting in Madrid that showed different scenes depending on who looked at it, always depicting that person's deepest fear. He began to read, to study, to understand. The work had begun. Days passed, or years, or centuries. Time had no meaning in the archive. Adrian documented cases from the past, understanding events that had shaped the church's hidden history. He studied cases from the future, learning what was coming, what would need to be prevented or preserved. He found files with his own name as the investigating archivist, cases from his time as a living priest, before the transformation. And he found cases he would investigate after, using his new form to enter places the living couldn't survive, to witness things that would destroy mortal minds. The archive taught him patience. It taught him perspective. It taught him that every moment of human history contained both divine touch and human choice, miracles and mistakes, grace and sin, all woven together into the tapestry of existence. And slowly, over centuries that felt like days and days that felt like centuries, Adrian became what Valentine had been. A guardian, a witness, a servant who transcended death because the work transcended life. But he was not entirely alone. Sometimes, in the spaces between moments, he felt presences, other guardians, perhaps serving their own shifts in the eternal rotation, or maybe just echoes of Valentine who'd served before him, or whispers of whoever would serve after him. The archive connected all of them across time, creating a continuity of service that stretched from the church's founding to its ultimate end, whenever that might be. Adrian found peace in that, purpose, understanding, but he also counted the years in his own way, not with calendars or clocks. Those had no place in the archive, but with cases. Each case was a marker, a monument to time's passage. Each file documented another moment when the divine touched the world, another mystery preserved. And he waited because waiting was part of the service. 847 years from his transformation, the door would open again. Someone new would descend those spiral stairs, would see the crypt, would make the choice he'd made, and Adrian would welcome them as Valentine had welcomed him. He would show them the archive, explain the work, prepare them for transformation. Then, finally, after 847 years of service, Adrian would be allowed to rest. The thought sustained him through the long centuries. Not the rest itself, but the knowledge that he was part of something larger, something eternal. A chain of guardians stretching across time, each one serving faithfully, each one eventually finding peace. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. The archive grew with each passing moment, new cases appearing on the shelves as they happened or would happen. Adrian documented them all with tireless dedication, his skeletal hands never trembling, his purpose never wavering. And in the world above, time continued its normal flow. The monastery stood silent on its mountainside. The 4 monks who'd sung woke days after Adrian's transformation, confused but alive, remembering nothing. The 3 monks upstairs stopped weeping simultaneously, their eyes clearing, their minds healed. Father Domenico sealed the crypt permanently, though the seal would break when needed. He told no one what had happened, understanding somehow that some truths were too large for words. Father Vincent drove the empty car back to Rome, reporting only that the matter had been handled. No details, no explanations. Just confirmation that special documentation services had done its work. And in the Vatican, 7 levels down, the circular chamber sat empty. The desk remained, covered in files. The cabinets lined the walls, holding centuries of cases. The gas lamps burned steadily, waiting for 847 years from Adrian's transformation, when a new envelope would arrive at some young priest's desk, waiting for the next guardian to descend those spiral stairs and make the choice that would change everything. But that was centuries away. For now, in the archive eternal, Brother Adrian served. He documented the bleeding icons of Constantinople, finally understanding the case he'd read about on his first day. He preserved accounts of the silence of God, preparing for an event that wouldn't occur for another 132 years but needed to be understood now. He studied the Phantom Monastery of Tibet, where an entire Buddhist temple appeared and disappeared on a 30-year cycle, visible only to those who'd lost someone they loved. The monks there, both Christian and Buddhist investigators working together, had documented the phenomenon for 6 centuries, proving that the divine transcended religious boundaries. He read about the children who remembered tomorrow, a case from 2089, where an entire kindergarten class in Oslo began drawing detailed pictures of events that would happen the following week. Not vague predictions, but specific images. Car accidents with license plate numbers, lottery results, newspaper headlines. The Norwegian government had wanted to exploit it. The church had quietly relocated the children and sealed the records. Adrian understood why. Some knowledge would destroy free will if widely known. Case after case, century after century, Adrian read and understood and preserved. But something unexpected happened as the centuries passed. Adrian began to notice patterns that Valentine had never mentioned. Connections between cases separated by thousands of years. Threads that wove through human history like golden filaments in a vast tapestry. The Weeping Madonna of Toulouse in 1978 was connected to the Crying Stone of Damascus in 634 AD, which was connected to the Tears of Heaven event in 2156 AD. All three involved divine sorrow made manifest, but each one occurred at a crucial moment in church history, times when faith wavered, when doubt threatened to overwhelm belief. The tears weren't random, they were responses. God's grief at humanity's struggle, made visible to remind the faithful that they were not alone in their suffering. Adrian documented this pattern, creating new files that cross-referenced the old ones. He began to see the archive not just as a collection of individual mysteries, but as a unified whole, a single story told across millennia. The story of how the divine loved humanity enough to reach through the veil of reality again and again, even knowing that most would never believe, most would never see, most would never understand. This realization changed something in Adrian. His service became more than mere documentation. It became translation. He wasn't just preserving cases, he was interpreting them, understanding the divine language spoken through miracles and mysteries, and he began to prepare for his successor in ways Valentine never had. Adrian created new files, synthesis documents that didn't just describe individual cases but showed their connections. He wrote guides for understanding the patterns, for seeing the threads that connected seemingly unrelated events. He prepared the next guardian not just to document, but to truly comprehend. Time continued its strange flow in the archive. Adrian couldn't say exactly how long he'd served. Counting became meaningless when past and future existed simultaneously. But he felt the approach of the end of his term, the way one feels the approach of dawn, an intuitive knowing that change was coming. He began to experience what Valentine must have felt in those final centuries: weariness. Not exhaustion, exactly, because his skeletal form never tired, but a deep soul weariness, a longing for rest, for completion, for the next stage of existence. The work was infinite, but his service was not. And that was mercy. One day, or one century, the distinction had long since blurred. Adrian felt it. The door would open soon. Very soon. Someone was being prepared, being called, being led through a life that would culminate in the descent to the crypt. Adrian didn't know who it would be. The archive showed him futures, but some futures remained veiled, even from guardians. Free will existed, even in matters of divine service. The next guardian had to choose, as Adrian had chosen, as Valentine had chosen before him. But Adrian could feel them approaching across time, their presence rippling backward through the archive. He returned to Valentine's old journal, his journal now, and turned to the final page. There, written in fresh ink despite the centuries that had passed, was a name: Father Ethan Cole. Adrian didn't remember writing it, but the handwriting was his own skeletal script, the same handwriting that filled countless files throughout the archive. Somehow, at the moment of his transformation, or in some eternal present, he had written the name of his successor, Father Ethan Cole, who would arrive in 2872 AD according to linear time, but was somehow already present in the archive's eternal now. Adrian prepared the chamber in the Vatican, returning there in a way he couldn't quite explain. In the archive, movement was thought, rather than action. He simply decided to be in the Vatican chamber, and he was carrying with him the essential files, the welcoming cases, the demonstrations of the impossible that would help Father Cole understand. He sat at the oak desk, arranging papers, just as Valentine had arranged them for Adrian's arrival. He felt time's flow beginning to realign, the normal world coming back into focus after centuries of dwelling in eternity. Soon, very soon now. And then, on a morning that felt like every morning, and no morning at all, Adrian heard footsteps on the spiral stairs, descending, 7 levels down, each level older than the last. The iron door opened. A young man stood in the doorway, brown hair, wide eyes, confusion and wonder written across his features. He wore a priest's cassock, held a flashlight in trembling hands, and stared at Adrian with an expression Adrian remembered well. The expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality was being challenged. "Welcome, Father Cole," Adrian said, his voice the same dry whisper that Valentine's had been, that all guardians' voices were. "We have much work to do." Father Ethan Cole stood frozen in the doorway, exactly as Adrian had stood centuries ago. The parallels were almost funny, if Adrian could still laugh. Same shock, same fear, same desperate attempt to rationalize the impossible. "What?" Ethan's voice cracked. "What are you?" Adrian smiled, though he had no lips, no flesh, no muscles to form the expression. Somehow the smile still conveyed itself. "My name is Brother Adrian. I died in the year 2025 during my service to the Vatican archives. I was 36 years old when I walked through a door that transformed me. I've served the Church in death for 847 years, and I continue to serve it now. I am your partner, Father Cole. Together, we will document what cannot be publicly acknowledged." "This isn't real," Ethan whispered. "This can't be real. And yet, here we are." Adrian gestured to the chair across from the desk, the same gesture Valentine had made to him, the same gesture that guardians had made to their successors for millennia. "Please sit, I'll explain everything, but first you must understand what we do here. You must understand why you were chosen." Slowly, moving as if in a dream, Ethan Cole crossed the chamber and sat down, and Adrian began to teach as Valentine had taught him, as guardians had taught their successors since the archive's beginning. He showed Ethan the case files, the weeping Madonna, the possessed bells, the speaking skull. He watched recognition dawn on Ethan's face, watched doubt battle with wonder, watched faith tested and strengthened. He showed Ethan the reflection in the Madonna's tears, Ethan's own face captured in 1978, decades before his birth. He showed Ethan the journal with his name, written in Adrian's hand centuries ago. He showed Ethan the truth, that some people were called to service that transcended normal life, normal death, normal time, and he watched Ethan process it all, knowing that soon, days, weeks, perhaps months from now, they would travel to a sacred place, a monastery, or a cathedral, or some other threshold where the door would open again, where Ethan would make the choice that Adrian had made, that Valentine had made, that guardians had made since the beginning, where Ethan would walk through the door into the archive eternal and Adrian would finally rest. But for now they had work to do, cases to review, mysteries to understand, knowledge to transfer from one guardian to the next. Adrian pulled out another file and slid it across the desk. "Our first case together," he said, "though in truth it's been waiting for you since 2847. The Singing Stones of New Soul." Ethan opened the file with shaking hands and the cycle continued. The work was never done. But then, it was never meant to be. Some servants of the church wear white and walk in sunlight, known and celebrated. Others wear brown robes marked with red crosses and walk in places where time has no meaning, unknown and unremembered. Both serve the same God. Both protect the same world. One is remembered, the other is eternal. And in the archive eternal, where every moment exists simultaneously, where past and future are merely different shelves in an infinite library, the guardians watch. They document, they remember, they serve forever. Epilogue, the eternal cycle. In a monastery outside New Seoul, in the year 2872, a door carved from black stone stands behind an altar. On its surface, a red cross glows faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. 7 monks kneel before it, singing a hymn that has been sung for over 2,000 years, passed down through generations, the words never written, never recorded, only remembered. They sing because the door will open soon. They sing because the next guardian is coming. They sing because that's what monks have done at every threshold, in every era, preparing the way for those called to eternal service. Father Ethan Cole descends the stairs with Brother Adrian at his side. The skeletal monk moves with grace born of centuries, his brown robes rustling softly, the red cross on his chest glowing in response to the door's pulse. "Are you ready?" Adrian asks. "No," Ethan says honestly, "but I don't think that matters." "It doesn't," Adrian agrees, and there's warmth in his whisper now. Affection earned through months of working together. It never does. The door opens. Beyond it, the archive eternal spreads in infinite directions. Shelves upon shelves upon shelves holding every mystery, every miracle, every moment when the divine touched the mundane. Ethan looks back one last time at the crypt, at the monastery, at the world where time flows in a straight line from past to future. Then he looks forward, at the infinite work, the eternal purpose, the service that transcends life and death. He thinks of his grandmother, who gave him a prayer book when he entered seminary. "God calls us to hard places," she'd said. The same words Adrian's grandmother had spoken. The same words grandmothers had spoken to future guardians for centuries, without knowing they were preparing their grandchildren for eternal service. Ethan clutches that prayer book now, feeling its weight, its reality, its connection to the temporal world he's about to leave behind. "Thank you," he says to Adrian, "for waiting, for teaching, for showing me what true service means." "It was my honor, Father Cole," Adrian replies. "Now choose." Ethan takes a deep breath and steps through the door into the archive eternal. The transformation begins immediately. Heat, purification, the dissolution of flesh and the emergence of bone. Ethan falls to his knees, the prayer book still clutched in dissolving hands, and understands with perfect clarity that this is where he was always meant to be. Adrian watches, remembering his own transformation, feeling joy for Ethan's beginning and relief for his own ending. When the transformation is complete, Brother Ethan stands in robes, marked with a red cross, his skeletal hands flexing, his new existence settling around him like a familiar coat. "Welcome, Brother Ethan," Adrian says, and his voice is lighter now, filled with the same relief that had marked Valentine's final words. "Welcome to eternal service." "Thank you," Ethan says, his voice already taking on the dry whisper of guardians. "Thank you for everything." "The thanks are mine," Adrian replies. "My service is complete. The archive has a new guardian. And I can finally sleep." Adrian's bones begin to glow with golden light, warm and welcoming. He smiles, that impossible smile that transcends flesh, and feels peace for the first time in 847 years. "Remember," he says, his voice growing distant, "you serve not to control, but to preserve. Not to judge, but to understand. Not to prevent all suffering, but to ensure that no suffering is forgotten, no lesson lost, no miracle wasted. The world above will never know your name, but it will be protected by your work." The light consumes him, dissolving bone into pure illumination. And in that final moment, Adrian feels not loss but completion, not ending but transformation into whatever comes after. His last thought is gratitude. Gratitude for the service, for the knowledge, for the opportunity to protect humanity from itself for 847 years. Then peace, pure, absolute, eternal peace. And Brother Ethan stands alone in the archive eternal, guardian of mysteries that span all of time, keeper of memories that protect humanity from its darkest truths and greatest miracles. The door closes behind him, sealing for another 847 years. The work continues, the cycle repeats, the archive preserves. And somewhere in the eternal now, Valentine and Adrian rest together, their service complete, their purpose fulfilled, their souls finally free. While in the Vatican chamber, 7 levels down, the oak desk sits waiting. Empty now, but not for long. In another 847 years, it will host another guardian, training another successor, continuing the eternal cycle. The gas lamps burn steadily, patient as stone. The filing cabinets hold their secrets, silent as tombs, and the iron door with its simple red cross stands ready, waiting for the next guardian to descend, to choose to transform, because the work is never done. But then, it was never meant to be. Some truths must be documented so they can be remembered. Some truths must be remembered so they can be prevented, and some servants must become eternal to ensure that the remembering never stops. In the Archive Eternal, Brother Ethan begins his first file, documenting a case from the year 3142 that hasn't happened yet but must be understood now. Above him, the world turns, nations rise and fall, technologies advance, humanity evolves. The Church endures, adapting and changing, while its core mission remains constant. And below, in the spaces between moments, in the places where time loses meaning, the Guardians watch. They document. They remember. They serve forever.